Hi, welcome to lecture number 14. So this is your final lecture in the CJLS 251 Specialized Investigations class. This is the conclusion of the statement analysis portion, so the second part of the statement analysis. And we're going to go through that in detail because that's the criteria that you need for the test example that you'll be doing on December 8th. Okay. Now, I'll roll you out lots of details on this. However, what you'll be doing is actually applying your knowledge on statement analysis on a statement that I'm giving you that you will have to determine, is it deceptive or is it not? You must be really specific on the criteria that you identify for any deceptive statements within the document. Okay. And obviously, we're going to go through that again today with the information that will conclude the statement analysis portion. It will be timed. I've got to establish the instructions and a few things, and I'll send those all out to you so that you can do it in the leisure of your own homes. But just keep in mind that you should keep the times that you're normally in class for the CJLS 251 on Tuesday, December 8th available so that you can do that quiz in the time that's required and send it back to me for marking. Okay. It was not a true-false, multiple choice, short answer, essay type of an assignment at all. It is an analysis of a statement. And that will be your challenge to analyze and find the specific deception within the statement. And I say specific with emphasis because it should be specific. There's not much point in saying, well, it's equivocation, and just saying that throughout your document. That's not going to cut it. So I need a full explanation of why you think this particular criteria exists. This is why I sent you out the Word document that has all the criteria on it, and you can use that obviously for this time, as well as any statements that any information that you've put on that document to clarify it for yourself, etc. Okay, and one of the key points here perhaps would be finding the particular information that you're seeking on that document. So don't hesitate to give yourself some specific references in there and tab it as you need it, etc. Okay, so the really way we can make this challenging is to keep it with a certain time frame. The final exam, you should also keep this available for your scheduling. The final exam is on Friday, December 11th at 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. This is the same time that was established back in September. So it is mandatory to take the final exam. It also will be a timed exam. And now I say between 2 and 5, which is a 3-hour time frame, which is usually what we give. However, I may reduce that depending on the nature of the exam. Once again, because it's an open book, it's a little different than simply having a regular exam in a controlled setting. So it is an open book exam, so get all your ducks in a row for that material as well. Okay? So now we're going to go on with some of the material that we need to know for the statement analysis portion. So once again, this is the basic process that you're going to go through on Tuesday, December 8th, but with any statement analysis, this is basically what you would do. So it should be based off a pure version statement, right? A flowing narrative, if you like. Not a question and answer so much as the person is allowed to write their own statement from beginning to end without interruption, without bias, without influencing their statement. Okay. And we know the pure version statement has the 3 portions to it, right? So from there, you're simply going to read the statement. Now, we talked in pure version statement, if they write it, you read it back to them so they can confirm that that's the information, and that you can confirm that you can actually make out their writings. And this is the ideal. If, on the other hand, they dictated it to you, then you would hand it to them to read, etc. Right? So for the statement analysis portion, though, you're going to sit down after the pure version is obtained through all the different processes and just read the statement again to make sure that it's clear. At that point, you're going to perform the 20, 50, 30 analysis on it. right? 20, 50, 30 rule analysis. So you're literally going to count the number of lines in the statement that deal with the introduction of the information, should be 20%, the core of the information, the bulk of the information, the salient parts, which is 50%, and then the ending, salutations, sort of conclusion, which should be ideally 30%. You're literally going to count that up, and you're going to tell yourself the numbers that are involved in that. If it's not 20, 50, 30, then you know there's a problem with it, right? So you're going to have to do this on our sample that we're going to give you for your test. So at some point up front, I would ideally suggest you should have in there that this does not conform to the 20, 50, 30 rule. It is 60, 10, 20, or whatever the case may be, right? Is that up to 100, 60, 10, 20? Maybe not. Anyway, so it should add up to 100, and it's based on percentages, but you can do it two ways. You can do the lines, the number of lines, and then work it into a percentage is the ideal, right? That's you could leave it as the number of lines too, and then it would become pretty evident that it's not 20, 50, 30% of the document. If your analysis suggests deception, then you're going to continue to identify specific criteria. So that's where you take out your document that I sent you, and you go through and you say, okay, where is there equivocation? Where is there resistance? Where is deviation from the norm? And all the other things that we're going to talk about today. Is there sequencing? Is there scripting? Okay. You're also going to look out for clusters and timeliness. Okay, because to be deceptive, they have to be in clusters and they have to be timely. Okay. You're then going to re-interview the person, and you're watching for scripting and major alterations. You're going to compare the two statements, and then if you can confirm that to you is deceptive, you would then confront the person. So the Undeutsch hypothesis, just remember as you're going through that the analysis that you're doing is based off the Undeutsch hypothesis. Okay? And at the end of the statement analysis that you'll do in December 8th, you'll also be asked for general comments. And those general comments should refer back to the Undeutsch hypothesis a little bit. Content, quality, expression are different. Okay, so that's part of this assessment as well. Keep in mind also that on the exam, the final exam, there will be questions on the Undeutsch hypothesis, but there will not be a sample to evaluate. Okay. So we talked quite a little bit last class on equivocation. So just keep in mind when you think about equivocation that not every statement in your analysis should simply say, well, it's equivocation. It sounds like the person is trying to qualify the statement. There will be times when it's evident that it is equivocation, but there's going to be other times when it's evident that it's some other criteria. And so it's a bit of a trap that people fall into where they can't figure out what exactly is wrong with it, so they say it's equivocation. And that obviously isn't the gold standard that we're trying to achieve when we're analyzing a statement. So this criteria is positives, not negatives. So what we're saying here is that when we describe something or when we think in terms of something and we give a description or an explanation of it, we tend to think in positive terms, like what's there, what exists. We don't tend to think of it in negative terms as to what's missing. Now, there's obviously many, many examples you could come up with when it's be really pertinent to say what's missing. If your car gets stolen, you're going to say, well, the car is missing. So you do have a pretty clear-cut statement that's truthful, but it's a negative, it's something missing. Where we see this more often, if a person is trying to describe something and they may be looking to give themselves an alibi, and they describe something that's missing, which is crucial to their innocence, then it may be used in that way, right? It sometimes stands out like a beacon when they start talking in the negative, but you have to be aware of it and you have to be looking for it as well, right? So the examples here, the apartment was in good order. Generally nothing was messed up too much. The couch and chairs were where they always are, and there was no music playing. Now, Negative, not positive, is there was no music playing. Now, if there's a situation where normally there is music playing, that's fine. If the person is missing their stereo or something, well, yeah, maybe. It's those odd statements of describing something that's not there that is quite unusual. If you had somebody come into your house and you were giving a description of them, you would tell us what they looked like, not what they were missing or didn't look like. Unless there was some exception that, it was very cold out and they didn't have a hat on or something, and you might comment, or they didn't have a coat on, and that you might comment that way. But otherwise, you would really just give us a description of what the person looked like. So it was very dark. There was no moon out that night. Now, that statement could be legitimate if it was important that they needed to be able to see, and there was no moon, so they had difficulty seeing. But otherwise, it is a negative statement rather than a positive statement, and it may be leading to something else. Now, a lot of times we talked about clusters and timeliness. There'll be another part of the statement which will then kind of substantiate that the person is using it for an alibi, the false statement. And it's really difficult to come up with a good example of positive, not negatives, that would fit in every circumstance. So each statement is going to have to be judged on its own merit. So verbs are action words. So when we consider the inconsistencies of the verbs and we verb choice, this is a pretty important area. So the examples here, verb inconsistencies. He insisted that I take off my clothes. Okay, so the inconsistency here is that you're being attacked by a person, you're being held hostage by them, whatever the case may be. Insisted is a very soft verb when you consider what's going on. He ordered me, he demanded me to take off my clothes. All those are more consistent with the threat level. He insisted is an inconsistent verb use. Okay. Hand me all the money. Once again, an inconsistent verb use. Hand me all the money, give me all the money, something a little bit more forceful. Now, once again, has to be in clusters and it has to be timely. So standalone may be curious, but it may just not be a sign of deception that you can take to the bank. It also will demonstrate resistance. He took me into the hospital. He took me into the hospital shows resistance. And once again, the literal meaning of the words are what we're looking at. Not just the context, but the literal word meanings. Took means you take somebody, you force them to go, right? That sort of aspect. So he took me into the hospital. If it was not a problem with the verb choice, it would be we went into the hospital, as an example. We found the body, it had been placed under a tree. Place shows advanced knowledge, familiarity. Once again, we're looking at the specific words. Place, you know that something's placed. If it was discarded, if it was thrown, if it was left, that's not showing any foreknowledge, but when it's placed, it does show foreknowledge, right? I brought my daughter back to her room. Now, the suggestion here is this is objectifying the daughter, that she was already dead at this point, and that the father carried her back to her room because she was an inanimate object by this time. She was no longer alive. So he didn't carry her back, he brought her back. Okay. And as I say, these are all based on cases that they've eked out of different cases and put into a statement analysis to understand how it functions. So once again, verb tense, in this case, verb action word. So the person is referred to in the past tense when the person is still should be alive, right? So a missing child who was actually killed by a parent would perhaps say something of this nature. He would have been 10 years old on his next birthday. They came into the car and they'd taken him. Past tense, taken. Should not be, those are beacons that stand out and say, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this, especially when the person is supposed to still be alive. So this is a case in the States of the Susan Smith, and we talked a little bit about this last year. So Susan Smith decided to drown both of her children, 2 and 4 or somewhere in that range, in John D. Long Lake. after her boyfriend said that she wasn't interested in taking on an instant family, etc. And she had a whole bunch of other issues going on that caused her a lot of stress and strain. So the police had suspicions right off the bat that perhaps these children hadn't been abducted by an African-American male, as she had suggested, but were actually had fallen to foul play by Susan. And so in her statements, they were conscious of the things that she would say. So one of the things she says is, no man would ever make me hurt my children. They were my life. So were my life is past tense. They were still searching for the children at this time. No one had ever found the children until Susan came forward and said, okay, I confess, and the children are in the bottom of John D. Long Lake. So to say they were my life instead of they are my life is a contradiction of the verb choice there, right? I would like to say to whoever. So now she's talking about identifying whoever. Now, she already has come forward and said it was an African-American male who abducted her 2 children and took her car at gunpoint. So she knows who it is, according to her story. So to say whoever has my children, that they, plural, please bring them home to us where they belong. Okay, so there are a couple of contradictions. So when we talk about being timely and in clusters, there's one line with two anomalies in it. That's the idea of clustering. I wanted to end my life so bad and was in my car, okay, so she's talking about her car, my car, ready to go down the ramp into the water. And I did go part way, but I stopped. I went again and stopped. I then got out of the car. Now it's the car. It's no longer her car, so this is a distancing aspect. She's trying to distance herself from the car. Goes from my car to the car. And stood by the car, a nervous wreck. And another one, she says, my children needed me, and it should be needs me, right? It should be present tense. So number of anomalies in her statements, and a lot of investigators understood that she was probably being deceptive, but it did take them like 9 days to get her to finally confess to the murder of her 2 children. So this is about noun choice. Now, once again, it's the establishing a baseline is important. Now, I've taken this out of a larger statement, obviously, right? And so I'm just trying to show that there was an inconsistency in the changes that went on here. This individual killed his wife, and then obviously was trying to make up a story as to what they had done and where they'd been, etc. Right? So my wife and I attended the theater where we watched an excellent rendering of The Taming of the Shrew. She enjoyed, so that's okay, my wife and she is fine. She enjoyed the performance immensely and commented to me on the quality of the performance. My wife, that's fine, consistent, is a follower of the arts and quite a qualified critical eye. Louise then suggested that we should dine at Ricardo's on 48th Avenue. Okay. So the inconsistency, obviously, it changes from my wife, she, to all of a sudden he calls her by name. Now we'll also see occasionally where the opposite is the case, and the person will be referred to as by name, and then they refer to him as he or she, or in some cases even it, after the person has been dispatched and died. Now the term the wife, in some cases, statement analysis folks say that the term the wife is a possessive aspect that indicates a problem. In Canada, of course, we know folks, especially on the East Coast, tend to use the term the wife. And I've heard it from other folks also who say the wife, and there's nothing nefarious involved in it. So you have to be a little cautious if it's an inconsistency, it may be one thing. If it's consistently used, it's totally acceptable. So when we account for something that's happened in the past, we use the first person past tense. I was at the fair and I saw such and such and did this. Right? First person past tense. If we use the term we and you're alone, then it's a suggestion that you're trying to avoid responsibility and you're trying to spread the wealth a little bit. We talked about that earlier in the last class. Okay? So in this particular case, the truthful statement, I was tied up with a belt and he was spinning me around. Okay, first person, past tense. Deceptive, I am tied up with a belt and being spun around. So the person is shifted from the limbic system, which is where the memory is based, to the frontal lobe, where the creative part of the brain is. And they're creating this statement now. They're no longer recalling it. And as they create this statement in the frontal lobe, they are regurgitating it back to you as if they're living it. Right? So I am tied up with a belt and being spun around. He started to spin me around while I am tied up with a belt. Now, started is one of those beacon words that we're going to see throughout here. In a past tense, first person past tense statement, which is what a statement should look like, you should not have the word started in it. Because in the past tense, you either did it or you didn't do it. If you put the word started in it, it means that, you're creating it through your frontal lobe as opposed to having lived it. Right? So the person either spun you around or they didn't spin you around. There's no need to use the term started. Now, there's exceptions, but anytime you see started, your spider senses so go up on the back of your neck, and you should be thinking, wait a minute, why is that word started there? And in this case, it's timely. You don't know that because it's the rest of the statement, but it is in clusters, right? While I am tied up with a belt, right? So keep in mind, started is an important concept. I think we actually mentioned that again in your documentation. So this is a statement from a husband who killed his wife down east in Ontario, I think it was. So the truth statement: I made breakfast while my wife dressed the kids and made the bed. So that would have been what the person should have said. Instead, they said, while I make breakfast, the wife dresses the kids and makes the bed. So this is not a truthful statement. This is the aspect of what they would have been doing as opposed to what he actually was doing. Okay? So while I make breakfast, the wife dresses the kids and makes the bed. He's not saying what occurred. He says what usually occurred, or he's saying what he would like to put in his statement to make it look like it occurred, but it wasn't what occurred. Okay? So while I make breakfast, the wife dresses the kids and makes the beds is not saying what occurred. He's saying what could have occurred or what usually occurs. So I wanted to reinforce the started aspect because started is one of those beacon words that if you see it in a statement, you have to analyze that portion of the statement clearly to make sure that it is accurate still. Right? So the truthful statement, he then tried to cut me with the knife, but I got away. Deceptive statement, he started to cut me with the knife. So once again, when we are recalling the past, it's something that's already occurred. You should know whether it either occurred or didn't occur. And so the word started is not an appropriate verb for that setting. So here's another one of those words that really shouldn't exist in a statement of the past. Just. Just is a mitigator. It is a justification term. It is sort of an excuse term in some respects. It was just a minor injury. I'm sure he did not mean to cut me. Okay? It was just a minor injury. Now, it doesn't have the same grammatical issues that some of the others have, but it is one of those words that traditionally are not found in a truthful recollection of the past. It was just a minor injury, is a mitigation, is an excuse, is trying to downplay something. And that's not necessarily the full meal deal that you're getting when you're getting a statement that has the term just in it. Now, once again, it may be okay. You'd have to see if it's in clusters and if it's timely. Now, very similar to the term just is explanations. The word so, because, or since. Okay. These are explanations, and I mentioned this a little bit before, that sometimes in a statement where a person is trying to conceal what they've done, they'll go on at length about justifying their actions. I mentioned the man who shot his wife in the kitchen, and he went on at length about, well, I went out hunting, and while I was hunting, it started to rain, and then I slipped on a wet spot and got my rifle all dirty, and I needed to clean it. So when I got home, I immediately went into the kitchen to start cleaning it so it wouldn't get rusty, because I didn't want it to be damaged since it was a brand new gun. Right? So there's a combination of so, because, and since. And then he had a small portion about, and I shot my wife, and as I was cleaning it, the gun went off and shot my wife. And then I called the police. So it didn't fit the 20, 50, 30 rule, but it also had things like so, because, and since. So I did such and such. This happened because this occurred since I was involved doing up my shoelace. Okay, since. Okay, so you're always going to be looking for those words, right? Just, so, because, since. And those are beacons in themselves. And once again, clustered and timely is important. Of course, when I talk about timely, if it's just a peripheral part of the statement, and you see these things, then it may not be timely. If it's during crucial parts where the person is stressed and describing those stresses, that's what we mean by timely. So proper names and changing the proper use of the proper names. This involves distancing. Now, we talked objectification when we talked about psychological profiling, and we saw that serial killers sometimes use a justification where they will bite the victims or dismember the victims and mutilate the victims because they become objects to them, and psychologically they need to distance themselves from what they've done to suggest that the person is not really a person. It was just an object that I've injured or hurt or whatever, right? So we see this in statement analysis as well, where the person tries to distance themselves from the identity of the person. So they've harmed someone, and they now have to change their orientation a little bit on how they see this person. So once again, you're looking for changes. You're looking for the baseline and any alteration from the baseline. So if a person is describing the past of what occurred, and they may be going first person past tense, and they're going along and they're talking about going for a walk with their son Johnny or something, right? And they're going on, and the term Johnny is used, and suddenly at some point it stops being used, then that may be the point where they actually harmed the child, especially if it's not used after that. And as I say, if they change it to he consistently, or even it at some point, then this is the distancing process. And it's okay to use Johnny's name in your statement before the actual murder, but afterwards it becomes a necessary condition for psychological distancing to not use the person's name. Now you have to refer to him as almost like an inanimate object, as opposed to my son or something like that. So the baseline changes are crucial in this way. So here's an example of a statement, part of a statement that was a father who killed his son, and was Johnny. Johnny and I went for a ride. We stopped for ice cream, and Johnny asked for chocolate. He went on at length with the statement. We sat on the bench at the park together, and Johnny went to play on the swings after Johnny and I went for a walk. And then that's the last time he uses the word Johnny. He liked to walk, and he really enjoyed himself on this walk. He ran into the woods around the back of the baseball diamond. God, I hope you can find him. Now, as I say, this is a portion of a much larger statement, and so it only gives you the kind of the salient idea that the name changes can be evident. And that baseline is really important, and that baseline can be crucial as to when the person actually did the other person some harm. So a Freudian slip is a psychological term used to describe when we misstate something, and the suggestion is that that misstatement is actually what our subconscious was trying to bring forward all along, that we really didn't make a misstatement. It was that we blurted out the truth, if you like, okay? And the example here is not great, but it's what we have. We were northbound on I-15 when the accident happened. It just seemed to happen so fast. Everything was going on all at once. I noticed that the car beside me was being driven very erratically, and as I swerved back into my lane, I stepped on the brake hard to avoid hitting him. Then I wanted to get close to get him to get his license plate number, so I sped up and got as close as I could. I was reading the number when he stopped right in our lane and slammed on the brakes. I hit him very hard. I didn't try to stop, but it was just no use. He was really close, and the harder I pushed on the brakes, the less I seemed to stop. Okay, I didn't try to stop is the Freudian slip. Right, so it's the opposite of what you would think he would be doing or trying to do in this set of circumstances. The second thing here is Belinda Stronach is the daughter of a financial multimillionaire, Frank Stronach, who owned, he started off with footwear and stuff like that, but he's quite wealthy, and him and his daughter happen to be in a big dispute right now trying to figure out who gets the money for their industry there. She was a politician, a Canadian politician for a while, and tried to run for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, then walked across the floor to join the Liberal Party. But on one of these media scrums, she's asked some questions and she responds, "If I know the answer, I'll tell you the answer. And if I don't, I'll just respond cleverly." So she was quoted as saying that, and that's obviously a straightforward Freudian slip because it does identify her as an idiot. Okay, yeah. So this is extraneous information. So this is a term used to describe if a person is giving you all kinds of information that really has nothing to do with the basic circumstances of the situation you're investigating, then it may be because they're setting up an alibi, they're trying to justify their actions, they're trying to take attention away from the actual incident, all kinds of reasons that extraneous information can be given. And I use the example again of the man who was cleaning his gun in the kitchen and shot his wife. So he had all kinds of extraneous information about going out and getting the gun wet and getting it dirty and needing to clean it right away so it wouldn't rust, and kind of on and on and on. And that's obviously extraneous information as to the accidental shooting itself. Okay? Now, it doesn't fit the 20-50-30 rule to begin with, but it's also information that, why is this person telling me all this information that's really not salient to the issue at hand? As it says here, they may even bring in things about their character and people that can vouch for their character. They may tell people where they had been, their location, when it's not necessarily been asked and not necessarily required to explain what's occurred. So the term "we" tends to be used when two people do something together, or a number of people do something together, right? It shows collaboration, it shows togetherness, cooperation, all those sort of things. So it's unusual if you are the victim of a crime that you would say, "We did this," or "We went there. He took me, he forced me," as opposed to "we going somewhere." Even to the point "we decided to fight each other" is an unusual kind of a statement. "We went to a secluded place where he continued to assault me." He took me to a secluded place where he continued to assault me would be more consistent. He dragged me. He, once again, those inconsistent nouns too, right? We spent the entire day together. I went to the Bay and Sears and purchased. This is actually a woman who shot her husband in the OPP. She lived in Canada, just outside of Ottawa. And they had marital difficulties. So he's sleeping on the couch down in the living room. She gets his rifle out and goes and simply shoots him one night, and then takes the rifle away, and then again up in the morning, calls the police and says, "My husband's here, he's dead," and et cetera, et cetera. And he was an OPP officer, an Ontario provincial police officer. So they come to investigate, and she, of course, one of the first things they do is they get a statement from her. And they try to put in context, well, what has your day been like? Because as a police officer, he may have been at risk of being attacked by somebody from outside of the family. Right? So she gives the statement of, well, we spent the entire day together. And that was kind of her opening line. And then she described at length all the things she did that day. And there was never the word we was not part of that statement whatsoever after that. It was we, my husband and I, went to out together for the day. And then it was I went to the Bay, I went to Sears, so it was a blatant example of baseline change, and it was an inconsistency with the word we. And the reason that it didn't match up is because she had already killed him the day before, and simply needed to give herself an alibi and said she went to all these different places with him when in fact he was deceased. Another couple ones involving we. So I'm home alone when a knock comes to the door. I answer the door, and a person is there canvassing for the Heart Fund. I give a donation of $100, and the canvasser leaves, and then we continue to watch TV. So this is a change of inconsistencies, right? From we to I, and back and forth again. And it have to be in clusters, and it have to be timely in order to understand exactly what the problem was. The other thing is, of course, she says she says I'm home alone when a knock comes to the door. I answer the door, and a person is standing there, and then later on she says we continue to watch TV. The fact that she says it's a person, and I know this case is a woman, a person is a attempt to conceal the identity of the gender of the person who knocked at the door. For whatever reason, maybe that canvasser came in, and that's who became the we. Perhaps they just were not trying to acknowledge that the person at the door was somebody they knew or whatever. But there's an inconsistency there for various reasons. We were watching TV together and put a movie into the VCR. Now, for you folks from the later generations, a VCR is actually a video cassette recorder. And this, back in the day, there used to be these things called VCR tapes, and you would put them into this little machine, and you could watch a movie on TV. Now, so that's a bit of an aside. So I made some popcorn, and I ate while watching the movie. I made some drinks later and some appetizers. I ate them over the course of the movie, and I went to bed. So the inconsistency is from we to I, once again, pretty straightforward. To just reiterate the information on the previous one, generic terms. So this is where you're trying to conceal the gender of the person or some other information that you don't want to release. Last night while I was relaxing at home, the doorbell rang and a person was at the door. People don't say there's a person at the door. A man was at the door. A woman was at the door. Maybe a canvasser was at the door. You might get that, but it just it seems that it's an attempt to conceal the gender of the person, because when you think of it, like, it's got to be a person at the door, but that doesn't describe it fully, and there must be a reason why you're not trying to describe it fully. So the lack of conviction is very much like equivocation that we noted earlier, right? It's simply another classification of the same thing, really. It's not much difference to it, okay? So I'm not sure, but I think it happened like this. So why is the person mitigating it? I believe that this is what happened. To the best of my recollection, this is what happened. Don't recall exactly, but I really can't say what I saw. So those are examples of equivocation that we see lots of times in people too. A lack of conviction, lack of detail. The person doesn't want to go to court, so they decide, well, they'll just fudge the story. They're afraid of the person that they're identifying as the perpetrator, so they're just going to fudge it. All those kind of motivations might kick in, as well as being deceptive because you have information that you don't want to release in some way, shape, or form. So a lack of emotion. Now, obviously, the statement, the nature of the statement, the content of the statement is going to dictate the emotional level as well. If a person is just a bystander who happened to witness something that's not particularly traumatic or of interest to them or whatever, then they simply may be saying a statement that seems very superficial. On the other hand, if a person is being victimized and they are really indicating to you that they've been, assaulted or something really fundamental, there should be a level of emotion within that statement. There should be some emotional aspects, and it should match up the emotions in the written statement, right? You're not going to be emotional as you're doing that first 20% where you're simply introducing, well, I was over here and I did this and then went out there. But when you get into the nitty gritty of it, if you're really recalling it from your limbic system, you should be getting a little bit agitated somewhat, and it should reflect itself in your writing as well. And then if you're asked to recount it orally, it should be consistent with that. So cognitive dissonance, we talked about this actually last year when we talked about detecting deception. So we can get this in oral statements. We can also get it in a written statement where the person is multitasking, right? And they're fabricating a statement and they start to get confusion and the statement becomes a little balled up and a little bit confusing. You get the wrong word choices in there. And once again, with statement analysis, you're looking for the actual literal meanings of a word. So if the wrong word is put in there, that one wrong word isn't a big deal. If it's in clusters and it's timely, then all of a sudden that changes the complexion quite a bit, right? So it may be cognitive dissonance. And now if you remember from last year, cognitive dissonance can be both a sign of deception and not a big deal. Okay, so once again, you have to look at it contextually, decide, is it in clusters and is it timely in order to make that conclusion. So just a quick example of cognitive dissonance. So this is Donald Rumsfeld, who was the defense secretary in the United States under the George W. Bush administration when they went into Afghanistan and also when they invaded Iraq. Right? So there was lots of times when Rumsfeld would caught in statements that were kind of apparently trying to not tell the media much, but on the other hand, wanted to appear that they were telling the media a lot. And that's a common thing in politicians that are trying to communicate to the media, and they're trying to say nothing while they're saying, a little bit of information. So one of the questions that's asked here of Rumsfeld is, do we know where Osama bin Laden is? And he answers, we do know of certain knowledge that he, Osama bin Laden, is either in Afghanistan or in some other country or dead. So he's kind of covered all the bases there, but he's either here or not here, or he's already dead. So cognitive dissonance, of course, it didn't make a lot of sense, the statement in hindsight, to see something like that. And of course, they're trying to conceal in this case, well, do they know where he is or don't they? Or have they been negligent and he's escaped and all that stuff, right? And then a second time, he's asked what he believes about something, and he says, I believe what I said yesterday. I don't know what I said, but I know what I think. And well, I assume it's what I said. So, he's got himself rather tied up in knots trying to answer some questions from the media. And it looks like cognitive dissonance. He's trying to handle too many things at once, and it causes him problems in his statements. So we often see that a person invoking a deity will come forward in order to emphasize their truthfulness, their honesty, etc. Once again, it's a baseline aspect. I had a friend of mine who worked with me in Vancouver, and he had this word whisker that he would always say, well, look, let me tell you honestly. And whenever he said that, I'd often think, well, have you not been honest all the other times? But it was just a word whisker that he used over and over and over again. So it was a consistency. As God is my witness, I swear to God that that's the god-awful truth. Honestly, let me tell you. So these sort of aspects, if they're consistent with the person's verbiage normally, that's one thing. If they've added it in order to give them self-credibility in their statement, then it may be another sign of deception. So the very or highly specific answer. This is where you're asked, well, and it may be a compound question, or it may not if the person's thinking they wouldn't do a compound question. So it may be simply, well, you were involved in this incident. And they might give him a date or whatever. And the person answers, I did not assault Jane Hiley on Saturday, August 12th, 2013 at her home in Calgary. He did assault her on another date in a different location, that sort of thing. So the specific answer is the person that thinks they can give you a quick statement that kind of shows that they're an innocent party. In actual fact, when you analyze it, they really have been very specific, and that specificity is kind of suggesting culpability. So a couple of things that sort of aren't really covered under the ones we've covered so far. Mitigation. This is where you're trying to explain the situation away. Right? Now, one of the good interrogation techniques they suggest is when you get a person and you're talking to the person and they're telling you a bunch of fabrications, you put to them, well, if that person was to be found, and what do you think they should get for a punishment? What kind of thing should happen to them? And the person who is the responsible party might say, well, they've got lots of excuses. Maybe they had a hard life. Maybe there's a reason for what they did. And they kind of go on that way. And they shouldn't throw the book at them type of thing. Person who's a real victim will say, yeah, just sock it to them. Give them all the punishment you can possibly give them. And there'll be no mitigation that goes with that. Mitigation is, of course, trying to ease it up a little bit and balance it that way. Right? On occasion, you also get a person who blames the victim. The blaming the victim is a very common aspect where you are actually saying, well, this person, they must have asked it for it. You're still lying to the investigator, but you're putting into context, well, why would anybody do that? She or he must have already invited the assault or attack or whatever the case may be. And so blaming the victim is a common methodology as well for this statement analysis. So we've talked about signs of deception, but we also want to look at signs of truthfulness a little bit. Because when we see these signs of truthfulness, it may mitigate what we think as far as the deception is concerned. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't have a statement that's mixed. Truthful, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's a lie, and then back to truthful. All those things are possible, and it makes it much more difficult to assess. Although the baseline change inconsistencies is what you're looking at then, and if you can see them, sometimes it stands out even more so than an entire statement being fabricated. So there is, pros and cons. So vivid sensory detail, we talked about this last year. These are the intuitive feelings that a person is expressing on a statement or in a statement. Right? It's things that when you read it, it's like, yeah, this happened to that person. There's like, this is detail that is really difficult to make up. Because if you're making a fabrication up, you're balancing all kinds of things. Your cognitive loading is going on, right? And you're trying to keep all the things in. So you can't really think of those deep things that occurred, like we were given an example here. Whereas if you live it, all you're doing is recalling it, and you do recall those things. Okay, an example here. So this woman was heading to the from the pool in her hotel room up to her floor, where she was staying for a couple of nights. So as she gets into the elevator, the door is closed, but then this occurs. I was in the elevator and had pushed the button for the 3rd floor when a man's arm stopped the doors from closing. And you can picture this sort of thing, right? The door is open, and I remember the cold air coming into the elevator. She's in the basement where the pool is, that cold air coming into the elevator. The man entered and pulled out a knife in the elevator and held it to my throat. He said, "Don't scream, and you'll be okay." He tried to abduct me, etc., etc. Okay? That cold air rushing into the elevator, it's really hard to make that up and imagine that under the stress of providing a statement to law enforcement after you've just been attempted abduction on you. And so it is vivid sensory detail that is kind of just sparks of, wow, this really sounds truthful. It really has that unique information that to make something up like that would take a little bit of an imagination and creativity. And at the pointy end of the stick, when you're giving a statement and you've gone through a traumatic event, it's unlikely that you would do that. So there's a number of other signs of truthfulness that are generally present in a truthful statement. So we talked about vivid sensory detail. Peculiarities of content. So there may be things in a statement that are strange, and you may be trying to evaluate, is it truthful or not truthful. So every statement isn't totally logical, isn't just, like a script. It should be some things that are strange are truthful statements still. Okay? Unsolicited emotions. So you shouldn't have to say to a person after a traumatic event, and they do their statement, are you okay now? The person will be either emotional, as they should be, or perhaps there's some reason for their logical approach. If you're showing empathy to the person and they suddenly break down after you've asked them something, almost like it's pretend, then that goes with the whole thing as well. So unsolicited emotions are normal and truthful. Okay. Memory gaps, so it's not unusual. We talked about hypermnesia. After a sleep, you have memories of more memories than what you did immediately after the incident. And memory gaps aren't unusual to happen in truthful statements. And even when you think trauma, in some cases, if a person's been traumatized by something, they may even have more gaps. Okay. Offense characteristics should be consistent with your knowledge is of these types of things, right? So if it's a robbery, there should be characteristics that are typical of a robbery. If it's a break and enter, it should be characteristics typical to the break and enter, etc. Right? So it should be characteristics of the offense that make sense. Remember, the criminal takes minimal amount of risk for a maximum amount of payoff. They don't want it the other way around. And they don't want to be hurt. They don't want to fail at what they're doing. They don't want to be arrested. If any of those things don't fit in, then obviously the offense characteristics aren't what they should be. Now, I just want to make sure that we understand what statement analysis is not. Okay, so detecting deception, we talked about this last semester when we talked about detecting deception and the role of the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic, right, fighting each other, trying to get back to equilibrium, right? When you believe that you're under risk because you're telling a lie, sympathetic system kicks in, your heart rate goes up, your perspiration will go up, your digestion slows down. All those sort of things occur. The parasympathetic is saying, calm down, everything's okay, relax, it's good, and you have that internal fight. This is not part of what we see in statement analysis, because for one thing, the person is writing their statement in many cases. It's not the autonomic nervous system that we're evaluating here. Okay? Now, if it's an oral statement, totally different. You're watching for those signs of deception in the person, that nervousness, the eye contact to an extent, a bunch of different aspects that we talked a lot about in the 131 class, CJLS 131. Okay? But statement analysis, so you don't expect that the person is going to be writing a statement and when they're doing the first 20%, everything is calm, and then in the 50% they write faster and get nervous. No, that's not going to work for our evaluation of statement analysis, and I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. Okay, so that ends our discussions on statement analysis. As I say, I'm going to prepare a statement for you to analyze on December 8th, and I will send you more instructions and information on that as we get closer.